The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
You've always got time for short time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine.
The one and only Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
It's Short Time Wrestling Podcast time. Hey, back in the U.S., back in the U.S., back in the U.S. of A. From the trip of the Junior Worlds, our guest today from Wrestle Like a Girl, Sally Roberts. Sally.
Hello.
Nice to have you on the show again.
Thank you for having me.
Are you excited?
Always excited. Yes. Yep. Always. When I get to talk about wrestling, I'm in.
And now this episode, we're going to be talking a lot about women's wrestling because there's been some big news that was dropped in the Wrestle Like a Girl Glitter and Gold Gala on July 29th. We'll get to that in a moment. And there's even bigger news that's come around. But in case you're wondering who Sally Roberts is, she has won a couple of world bronze medals. She's kind of cool and has started this thing called Wrestle Like a Girl, a grassroots organization aimed at promoting and growing women's wrestling from the grassroots level all the way up to the college level as it moves into the junior and senior levels of the world championships. And before we get to what Sally's been doing with Wrestle Like a Girl, we're just going to talk a little bit about Tampere, Finland right now. And before we got started, you said that it was one of the most epic world championships that you've seen in recent memory. What was so epic about it from your perspective?
I loved that we had 3 world titles from 3 different disciplines. So there was just an amazing draw of athletes that were there. They were all competing with their hearts. And it was so cool to see Team USA just rocking it on the world stage in men's freestyle, in women's freestyle, and also in Greco. Holy smokes, that dude was insane.
Yeah, the first time ever that the United States has won individual world titles in all 3 styles in the same year. And the only other options we went back and looked through, it didn't happen in 99. And the only other time that there was definitely a Greco champ was 93, at least in recent memory, because, and that was the first year, I believe, the United States had sent even a junior representative. There was only one wrestler from the U.S. That was on the, participating in the Junior Worlds that year in 1993. So we've come a long way.
It has been awesome to see how far we've come. And the neat thing for me is, as a spectator and a wrestling fanatic, is to say, wow, imagine how much better we're going to always be doing as we continue to push that envelope and keep providing and increasing those opportunities for our wrestling youth in the United States.
How about Maya Nelson, women's world champion, junior world champion?
You know what? Here's what I love about Maya Nelson. 1, she's from Colorado, so I would see her at the Olympic Training Center quite a bit. 2, almost a year ago today, she was hobbling around on crutches and ACL surgery, and she just looked at me and said, you know what? I'm going to come back stronger than this. I'm going to come back better than this, and I'm going to come back and take over the world. And I was like, yeah, girl, you do you, because that's what we always say to athletes that are always hemmed up, right? Trying to liven their spirit. She was 100% dedicated and committed to that. And so when you look and say, wow, she's a world champion, I think that's cool. But when you look back a year ago and see her hobbling around in her brace and on her crutches, holy smokes, she made some progress in a year.
Yeah, and as you said, Colorado, I was talking to her briefly when my daughter was first born. She was born in Denver at Presbyterian St. Luke's, and we had to drive by Denver East High School right there in Colfax, basically every single day, because my daughter did spend a little bit of time up there. So it was like, oh, there's Denver East. Oh, there's Denver East. And then we see Maya Nelson in the Fargo finals one year. I'm like, hey, she goes to Denver East. I know where that is. So yeah, it was pretty cool to see the whole Colorado thing come to fruition.
Wrestling's a small world, and we got a lot of friends all over that we have something in common with. So I think it's awesome.
I mean, we could break into a rendition of Friends Forever from like Zack Attack from Saved by the Bell.
At the end. We'll do that at the end.
Yeah, Friends Forever. No, we'll do it now. No, actually, that's all I know, even though as big of a Saved by the Bell fan as I am. So, speaking to Sally here, if you are unfamiliar with Wrestle Like a Girl, we're going to save you the time and say go back to mattalkonline.com/289. That will be our initial interview with Sally that took place in October of last year. We're almost to a year. So now we're going to pick up with Sally on first. Let's talk about what has become of the organization since our initial interview, October 28th, 2016, to now, August 9th, 2017? Where do we stand?
As an organization, our mission was to empower, advocate, educate, support, and grow female wrestling. And really what we did as an organization was we sat down and strategically thought, what can we do to really start to create these opportunities for females in the sport of wrestling in the United States? So we went to D.C., Washington, D.C. We conducted some free wrestling clinics throughout some of the poorest schools and the poorest wards and showed these athletes that anyone can wrestle. Because of that, the athletic director for the District of Columbia and the Mayor Muriel Bowser, have agreed to sanction both boys and girls wrestling for the first time ever in the district. What they're doing is really cool. It's 5 boys, 5 girls make one team because they know that they don't have enough athletes to roster both male and female wrestling, so they've made it a combined co-ed team. That's been a really neat program and a process to be a part of. And then we recently have worked with the United States Olympic Committee, USA Wrestling, the National Wrestling Coaches Association, the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and we all came together to say, hey, we're doing the emerging sports status bid, and we're going to be submitting. Let's make this a combined effort so we can use all of our talents and abilities and make it a strong proposal. We started doing that, and then, no kidding, in the middle of the process, the NCAA changed their rules. So no longer could we use those letters of support like what you would have seen on the internet with Tom Brands. We had to have letters of commitment with an attached budget. And they basically moved the field goal as we were running towards it. So in true wrestling fashion, when things get really hard and gritty, that's when we really come into our element and say, oh, okay, we're finally getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we went through and used the existing infrastructure and reached out to all of the schools that already had NCAA wrestling for women and just had them write their letters of support. I was able to go online at the NCAA.com website and pull up their budgets that they already had to submit online, so I didn't have to ask them to write a new budget. And that meant I needed to reach out to 2 new institutions to get those letters of commitment. One of them was Averett University and the other was Arizona State University, and they both agreed to support. And one of the interesting things is that just being creative in how we went about the process made it so that we were able to get those letters to submit for the bid in emerging sports status. One thing that I really like to point out is that we're not the only sport that submitted our letters, our bids for emerging sports status. So did acrobats and tumbling for women. And I thought, well, that's crazy. That's a spinoff of gymnastics. And so all they had to do was go to some existing institutions and say, hey, can we get these letters and can you guys write a budget? And their bid through the grapevine, their bids were submitted earlier than ours. But we were in a really interesting position because we're legitimately trying to add a new sport to the NCAA, and we needed to rally, and the wrestling community did that.
And just so people understand what emerging sports have been with the NCAA, mainly to kickstart women's athletics around the country. There have been sports right now. Currently, equestrian, rugby, and triathlon are the 3 emerging sports. Previous emerging sports have been bowling. Rowing is probably the most successful example because it's a large roster sport and helps offset the gender equity numbers as some schools like to use it for. Now, when we look at everything that goes on with the emerging sports status, I worked with the NWCA for 3 years. I worked with USA Wrestling for 3 years. Each time during my tenure at both of those organizations, emerging sports status was always on the docket. It was always on the table, but it was never the first thing on the table. There were some things involving weight certification and things of that nature and different things with the NCAA. Now, Wrestle Like a Girl comes in, and this is one of y'all's primary focuses right off the bat. So working together with everybody, how much do you think the other organizations looked at you and be like, oh, thank goodness, here, take this. We want this. We just don't have the manpower, or in this case, woman power, to do it. So, in the discussions with USA Wrestling and the NWCA, how much work had they done in the process that you were able to be like, okay, we can nail this home for you?
They were awesome. It truly was a combined effort because we came in and we had the gumption and the ability and we had the resources that we were going to dedicate towards this. But there was just existing knowledge that I couldn't have brought to the table. So my partner in crime throughout this process was Gary Abbott, who sat down and worked out writing all of the intricacies and all the details so that when we went to go submit the bid, it looked really, really good and it had all the questions answered. But what we did, and this is where we came from, and this is where Mike Moyer came in with the National Wrestling Coaches Association, he said, hey, if I can tell you one thing about wrestling, it's that wrestling coaches and wrestlers really don't like being told what to do by administration. And so if there was a way that I can make that suggestion to say, let's give them something sort of loose that they can wrap their brains around, and as a sport and as a sporting entity, we can determine what that future looks like, that's going to have a really lasting benefit within our wrestling community. And so taking all of those pieces of influence and thought and knowledge and intelligence and putting it together really made it go farther. Terry Steiner, he was the one that said, hey, let's make women's wrestling a fall freestyle sport so that it doesn't conflict with the men's season. And if those athletes wanted to go on and wrestle at the World Championships, they could have a seamless season going from freestyle for the NCAA right into the World Championship season. So there was so much thought and so much creative energy that went into making it a very powerful, impactful bid so that we could give our athletes the best opportunity available.
Now, from an athlete perspective, high school wrestling in a lot of states is folk style. The WCWA, when it jumped on board, and in these programs like at Minnesota Morris started Missouri Valley, and then all these other programs started blossoming up. Simon Fraser has come down from Canada. Freestyle seems to be the bid is freestyle. This is the first time I've heard about the fall season, though. So first, let's talk about the stipulations on why freestyle. I think it's pretty obvious, but I need to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And then the fall thing, that's something that kind of is like, wow, I didn't even think about it that way.
That is what happens when you ask people that are experts in their field to give their keen insights. And that was Terry. He was actually saying that for a long time. Hey, if we ever add women's wrestling to the NCAA, and it's not when we're going to add it, but not if we're going to add it, but when we're going to add it, it really needs to be freestyle and it really should be a fall sport. And so as we were going around talking about it, yeah, it made sense. And as we were going around talking to coaches, those coaches were saying, hey, that's a great idea. So that was really how that started to come about. And then in regards to freestyle was already what's happening within the WCWA Women's College Wrestling Association. So we just took that model and it made sense because that leads to an established Olympic pipeline. And so that was how we were able to get the USOC, the United States Olympic Committee, on board. The director of collegiate partnerships, Sarah Williamini, she came from the NCAA, and she worked at the Office of Inclusion, and she's former colleagues with the office that we had to submit our bid to. So she was completely instrumental in helping us with all of the small questions that we had, not necessarily playing favoritism to the sport of wrestling because there was two other sports that submitted their bids, but we knew that she was a resource that we could reach out to when we were starting to have questions about some of the legislative properties. And she was also the one that said, hey, there's like rowing, you don't have to have wrestling at the high school level per se to have an NCAA emerging sports status, because if you look at rowing doesn't exist at the high school level at all. They recruit for their sports on the first day of college campus at a table saying, hey, sign up for rowing. So she was there to help dispel some of the myths that we were hearing and really provide that truth and clarity in the process.
And there's the trickle-down effect. Where do you see now high school federations? So we get this thing, we'll get to the steps to get this thing passed, but let's put the cart in front of the horse for a moment and say, okay, say this gets approved. Now the trickle-down effect. How quickly do you think the national high school federations and the state associations are going to say, okay, well, we've got the NCAA, there's a college system, we've got the Olympic backing, now let's get this started at the high school level?
Excellent question. So that was a bit of a challenge for us as an organization, was that we had sort of dialogue with each of the 44 states to say, hey, what do you guys need for sanctioning? Where are you at? Is it numbers? Is it funding? Is it policy? Is it politics? Let us know what that answer is, because then we can develop a campaign around it. And so for the most part, it's really just building that awareness and providing the infrastructure. So with getting emerging sports status and being able to submit that bid, well, that means that we can now go back to those 44 states, like what you've said, and say, hey, we now have this infrastructure, so we need to make sure we develop that pipeline. And we've been getting asked, and there were inquiries to say, well, why didn't you get more states sanctioned before you went this route? And really it was which one was going to be the easiest to move. And not to say it was going to be easy to do NCAA emerging sports status, but it definitely proved to have different challenges than working with each of the 44 states. And then additionally, there are some states that are really on the cusp. There's just that lack of awareness. And so one of the things that we have to do is, now that we have this emerging sports status, is to re-engage each of those states to say, hey, this is what we've done. Here's the press release. Here's what it looks like. And here's how we need for you to get on board to help increase that educational and social mobility for all of the athletes that wrestle in your state.
Now we're back to the Wrestle Like a Girl, the bid status. So here's how I found this out. So, and this wasn't a press release. You guys hadn't even dropped this yet. But at the Glitter and Gold Gala at the Broadmoor, which is a pretty swank place in Colorado Springs, the USA Wrestling just finished up their state leader summit there. And Adeline Gray had started Instagramming, doing a live Instagram feed of it. So I see it pop up. I just happened to be walking to pick up my phone to charge it. And I look, I was like, oh, I turn up. And it's right when you're up there talking about the emerging sports status, and then you do your little pirouette waiting for the video to start, and then Meg Stevens shows up on the video board, and she is the athletic director at Averett University in my home state of Virginia, in Danville, not Danville, Danville, and she says that that Averett has signed on to become the 10th school, and that was the number that was required, as you explained earlier. And Sally, I'm not going to lie to you here. I sat there, and my wife looks at me, she goes, what's wrong? I go, they did it. And I started getting choked up because I know this has been on the plate of USA Wrestling. It's been on the plate of the NWCA. It's been on the plate of women's wrestling coaches for years. But to sit there and actually hear it, unexpectedly, and like I said, I got choked up about it. And I know what you guys have gone through. And what was it like when you got that letter from Averett University, that knowing that there was number 10? There was number 10, because on this list of 11 schools, there are 2 that do not currently have women's wrestling, Averett and Arizona State. So let's first start with Averett was number 10, and then how Art Martori and Arizona State, I'm sure they're tied together with the 11th school.
Averett University. Well, here's the really fantastic thing, is that Mike Moyer had some conversations with Averett University about starting a women's wrestling program, and this was months ago. And he and I had a very brief conversation about it. He reached out asking if there might be anyone that I would know of that could potentially help facilitate moving that along. But it was not really on the forefront of my brain. One of the interesting things that happened was that I was speaking at a seminar about women's wrestling and about why we need to give this opportunity for girls and what wrestling does for these athletes. And someone came up to me and said, I'm really good friends with this lady named Tiffany, and I want to connect you. And I thought, that's really great. Okay, I don't know who Tiffany is, but I'm always willing to engage, especially when it comes to advocating for females in the sport of wrestling. Well, it turns out 5 months later, the Tiffany that I got connected to was Dr. Tiffany Franks, who was the president of Averett. And I said, hi, my name is Sally. Someone connected us, and I just wanted to reach out and say hello. And she wrote me back and said, I cannot believe that you are emailing me, because I've been trying to figure out how to add women's wrestling. And that began this really great dialogue. Well, it was maybe sooner than what she would have wanted to do, potentially, with announcing support and going forward with the emerging sports status and looking at a program and figuring out ways to facilitate that. I reached out to her and I said, hey, doctor, we really need a 10th letter in order to push this over the line. I know that it's probably sooner than what you would want, but would you be willing to have open a dialogue and have a conversation about this? And she picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, we're on your team. We want to support this. We want to get women's wrestling here. We have men's wrestling. I'm a huge supporter of it. And what you don't know is that we've been watching your Wrestle Like a Girl videos. And so we've been trying to figure out how to make this happen. And so you're helping us really facilitate it. And we're on board and we're excited. So that is the wrestling community. And that's the value of putting yourself out there and having those conversations with people. And even though you don't know them or what they have to offer, being open to the idea of endless possibilities.
Now, the one D1 school on this list is Arizona State University. Let's explain. Art Martori has been related to that program in Sunkist Kids for a long, long time. This one, it almost seemed like everybody said, okay, who's going to be the first D1 school to do it? And no surprise that Arizona State was on this list, but it was a surprise that Arizona State was on this list.
Well, and here's a really interesting thing that came with Arizona State was that they submitted a letter last year. They had a letter written, and they were ready for it. And so they sent us a letter. We had it for over a year. Kim Mattori did. And then when the NCAA changed the parameters and said, hey, it has to fit within this wording, and it has to fit within this particular guidance, and it needs to have an attached budget, or it has to have some sort of statement that says, hey, we want to support this, but before we can submit a budget, we have to understand the legislative properties that are going to go into this emerging sports status bid, such as coaching or scholarship schedule, all of these intricacies that actually help make up this effort. Well, we reached out to Kim Mattori and said, hey, I get that they already wrote this a year ago. Would you be willing to reach back out to the administration on behalf of this effort and see if there's anything that they can do as an institution to support this, so that we can take it from the letter of support pile and put it into that letter of commitment of supporting this bid? And so Kim and Art went and did some things behind the scenes and had some conversations and utilized their network as they've been building it over the years at Arizona State University. And within 48 hours, we had an amended letter that was exactly what we needed to be able to put into this bid to submit it for emerging sports status.
So here are the 11 schools, and 9 of these already have programs, or they're starting programs this year. Adrian in Michigan, Division III. Arizona State and Averett are the 2 ones that don't yet have programs. Emmanuel, which is moving from the NAIA to Division II. Ferrum is Division III in Virginia. King University in Division II. McKendree in Division II. Pacific, you know a little bit about that, in Division III. Westminster, a Division III school, starting up a program this year in Missouri. And the juggernaut from Canada, Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, NCAA Division II. So those are the ones that the NCAA has. This doesn't even take into consideration the number of the NAIA schools that have added that are really doing it. Where's the progress now that the NCAA bid? We'll talk about the timeline for the NCAA bid, but before we get to there, the NAIA process for emerging sports status. What's the similarity? What's the timelines there? How does that one work for as far as Wrestle Like a Girl is concerned?
Another audacious goal that we're going to be taking on, and our vision is to get emerging sports status, and then we can start addressing other areas of the country where we can create those opportunities.
All righty. So now, what is our timeline? As we look at on NCAA.com, you can search for the emerging sports process for women. And now, let's see. The timeline is, August 1, proposal must be submitted for the NCAA Office of Inclusion. Then this will be viewed by the Committee on Women's Athletics during the fall. That's next month, September, October. So we've still got a time to wait on this. Then February, the committee extends the invitation to present the proposal to the spring committee. Then we go to April. There's the spring committee meeting. So it's June 15th of 2018. You guys are going to probably have to. It's a wait and see now. What's going to happen between the bid process as it was submitted August 1 to June 15th when the recommendation from the committee, the final step will happen?
I have a very large workload. So we've essentially, for all of the wrestling fanatics that are listening, by submitting that emerging sports status bid, we've made weight. And now we actually have to go and wrestle those matches, which is equivalent to me going out and doing lobbying. I have to attend all of the NCAA meetings that I can so that people know who I am, what I'm doing, and why I'm doing this, and start to build that relationship and start to build that rapport. And then additionally, there are 4 other Division I schools that were keen on supporting this emerging sports status bid, but because of the NCAA and the way that they wanted the bid and those accompanying budgets, some of those institutions, 4 of them, were not able to, during the summer, meet with their board of regents or work quickly enough to be able to submit that. So we have that emerging sports status bid submitted, and we are hoping that we're going to be making an amendment to continue providing those letters of support and keep working with and speaking with any of these institutions that want to add a women's wrestling program. So you saw that Tom Brands with the University of Iowa. I mean, he's fantastic. I had a relationship with him because when I was wrestling in 2005, I needed a place to train. And so I went out with Lee Fullhart, and he was so gracious with helping support and making it so that I could make that 2005 world team. So I reached out to some existing relationships of coaches, and I said, hey, you may not want to support this, but I'm going to ask you because I know you personally. And so I sent Tom Brands an email, and I got a phone call back within 5 minutes that said, hey, Iowa Hawkeyes, we're absolutely behind this. We absolutely want to support this. We have a wrestling tradition. Perfect. And so when I had to call him up and say, hey, can you submit a budget? He was like, nope, I cannot do that. That is out of my hands. It's the summer. And so really it's going to be going through and continuing to network and build those relationships and have those conversations with institutions. This summer, November 5th, there's going to be the All-Star match, and that's going to be historic because there's going to be equal representation of men's weights and women's weights for the first time ever. So going out there and inviting the Ivy League commissioner to come and attend that, so that she can see that there's equality happening and going ahead and making those relationships and massaging them so that if there's any other institutions that want to have a conversation about adding women's wrestling, that can happen. And all of that's going to come together and completely bolster our package for emerging sports status.
Yeah, and there's been a large Facebook group that's been floating around called Bring Women's Wrestling to the Ivy League, and you talked about the Ivy League presidents, and of course we one of the young ambassadors for Wrestle Like a Girl, another my home state's coming back through this. Brianna Santos, she was featured in the video early with Wrestle Like a Girl. She's going to Columbia. So I'm pretty sure there's going to be a tie there between that particular university, maybe young Miss Santos perhaps participating. We don't know yet. I don't have any. I'm just spitballing what I think could be a natural progression of, hey, we've got some women's wrestlers that are on the ladder at the developmental and junior levels that are, attending your school. Perhaps this is good PR.
Yep. Yes. So there's some really neat things happening, and there is so much positive momentum. And one of the things that we've always done as a wrestling community is that when there's been an opportunity to grow the sport and band together, we've always done that. So I was actually reflecting back this morning on the Committee to Preserve Olympic Wrestling that got convened when wrestling got dropped from the Olympics. That entity was so powerful that it was able to come together, promote wrestling in such a positive way that it got wrestling back into the Olympics. And in a similar but different way, we have our organization, Wrestle Like a Girl, where we're not trying to get wrestling back into the Olympics. We're trying to create these opportunities for the first time and pull together and band together and work with wrestlers in business and with USA Wrestling and the USOC, and making it so that we can all understand why this is important and move together in one cohesive unit. Because when wrestlers do that, that is when we truly take over the world in a very positive and powerful way.
Next steps, so you talked about lobbying, and this is something, the last time I saw you was at Hall of Fame weekend in Stillwater, and you were there with a group of women with Wrestle Like a Girl. Catherine Schei was there, her mother Joan, then you also had yourself, Marie Ziegler, Afsoon. I mean, these are people that have been floating around this group for a while, and one thing you guys did that I thought was the most impressive, and it's a simple construct to do, is at the banquet for the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Honors Weekend, it wasn't a table of Wrestle Like a Girl. You guys were at you're at different tables, spreading the gospel of Wrestle Like a Girl. It's a simple thing to do. It's like, okay, we're going to sit at this table, this table, this table, this table. How successful do you think that little strategy was?
It's been amazing because people are so responsive and so receptive if they have the information. And so what we did at the National Wrestling Hall of Fame for Honors Weekend is exactly the same model that we used when we went to the State Department and attended the Mega Sporting Chance Forum, when we went to the United Nations and attended the Committee on Women's Athletics, and when we went to the NCAA Diversity and Inclusion Forum, where we got to talk about women's wrestling. We absolutely took a handful of us and took those advocates, took those ambassadors, and went and talked about wrestling and equality and opportunity for all, and making sure that they know that wrestling is the most inclusive sport. We have an NCAA champion that that does not have a leg. We have some girls that came through our Wrestle Like a Girl camp. One of them is blind. We had another girl that came through and was missing a hand, and they were both wrestling, and they're both being so fantastic. So when we were able to take our information and go and positively affect our own different spheres of influence, we're growing that pie instead of taking it and sort of dividing it up into smaller pieces. Another thing that we've been able to do with that tactic is that the sponsors and the supporters that we get to come on board for Wrestle Like a Girl have tended to never support wrestling before. And so we have entities that are coming on board saying, I want to support you, yeah, because of wrestling, but really because of the empowerment that you're giving girls. And so what we're able to do is get more people on board, more people to love wrestling, to understand why wrestling is important, why it's beneficial, and why America's youth need to have that opportunity.
All right, Sally. Now, one thing that always is going to come up when it comes to women's sports is Title IX, and wrestling has been very resistant to said law over the years because of many people view as prong one proportionality has led to dropping of programs. A lot of times it's tied to budgets, but proportionality comes up every time that there's a budget discussion. Okay, we need to drop a sport. Well, let's see where we lie within proportionality standards and things of that nature, even though there are three prongs that are technically viewed evenly, but most of the time we know that the safe harbor construct was in place during the Clinton administration. That tried to be taken away, and now they still try to balance all three equally, but proportionality is the one that schools use the most. People have been saying for years that women's wrestling can help save men's wrestling. This case, I see it as women's wrestling finally has the opportunity to be a sport, but now it can help men's wrestling, not for the sake of, oh, well, we can add this because it helps men's wrestling. No, now we can have both programs at places that now it doesn't insulate you from being one sport being cut or not for budgets, but it does provide at least a male to female equivalent that makes it a little tougher to cut things to save money on the budgets because they're typically going to be using the same resources.
And you're absolutely right. So, and I view it the same way too. It's not that women's wrestling is saving men's wrestling at all. Women's wrestling is coming into its own. And we have an opportunity now to have emerging sport status. And because of that, we can approach institutions. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm from the state of Washington. And when I was in college, I got recruited to go wrestle at the University of Minnesota Morris, one of the first institutions that offered women's wrestling. But do you want to know how amazing it would have been for me to be at the University of Washington wrestling? And one of the aspirations that I have, one of my very big audacious goals, is to get wrestling back in the Pacific Northwest and get it at the University of Washington and have men and women's wrestling. And now we can take it as a combined package. So when I say, hey, we're here with Wrestle Like a Girl to create opportunities, that just means that we want to make sure that we're advocating for female wrestling, but we want to grow wrestling as an entity as a whole overall and approach institutions that may only have men's wrestling and add a women's, or institutions that don't have wrestling at all and say, yeah, but you used to have it. Let's get back to where we can have it again, and what do you need to make that happen?
And one thing that also just popped into my head about this talk, and going back to the whole fall season, the California Community College wrestling season, the men's season, is a fall sport. There has been discussion within the California Community Colleges about adding women's wrestling as a sport there. Has Wrestle Like a Girl had any discussions with those schools in that league about, hey, let's implement this in the junior colleges in California?
There has been some really great conversations. It's still a little bit premature to say where those conversations are at or where they're going to. But I'll say that there has been a very large and very strong support group saying we need to have our junior colleges and we need to have that infrastructure in place, because one of the hesitations and one of the concerns is that, hey, there might not be enough, there might be some athletes that unfortunately would fall through the crack because of NCAA eligibility. So what sort of infrastructure can we put in place so that those athletes can go to a college and get prepared to go on to compete at an NCAA? And, you know, when I think about that, I think of my old wrestling teammate, Daniel Cormier. Before he went to Oklahoma State University, he wrestled for a season or two at Colby College in Kansas so he could get his grades up to even go to Oklahoma State University.
Yeah, so the 2-year option could be something that's on the table. Now, one thing also, as you talk about all this conversations you're having with the USOC, the Hall of Fame, USA Wrestling, the NCAA, the NAIA, everybody that is anybody, there is now a central landing point, a central place for people interested in trying to grow women's wrestling, and that is your organization. Less than a year ago when we were talking, a lot of this was still in the discussion stages. I mean, are you, what's your feeling on the growth and I guess the reach that you guys have had from basically becoming an idea to becoming immediately relevant, not just in the wrestling landscape, but in the entire sports landscape?
When we have been given opportunities to go and speak or present, whether it was at the United Nations or the National Wrestling Hall of Fame or at Olympia Elementary School in Kansas, we took every single available opportunity, because one of the things that we are so completely aware of is that in order to push a movement, people have to know about it. And they're never going to know about it if I stay in my office behind a desk, typing away at a computer and calling people on the phone. I had to actually put myself in places where I could increase visibility. And I had to make sure that when I was out there, I spoke intelligently and that I was able to represent myself, wrestle like a girl, and all of the sport of wrestling very, very professionally so they could understand the benefit. So really, it came down to having experience within the sport. It came to being able to speak very knowledgeably about wrestling, women's wrestling, why women needed to be involved in sport at all, and then putting ourselves out there at any available opportunity to increase the visibility so that people knew that we were here, we existed, and that we want to work positively and collaboratively to push the sport forward.
And all that travel, that definitely costs some money. And I've noticed that Geneva Gray, the Adeline's younger sister, who's the head wrestling coach now at Bacone College in Oklahoma, she's out there in Fargo working a booth. Catherine just is, I don't know if she's had the baby yet. She's about to pop, I guess, traveling around and her mom. And this all costs money. So for those out there that are just like, yes, I'm on board. I am buying everything Sally Roberts is selling. I want to help. This costs money. How can they contribute to the organization? How can they help with your fundraising efforts? And how can they help make women's wrestling something it's not just an anomaly? This is a legitimate sports, an Olympic sport. What can people do to help your effort?
There's a few different avenues if they would want to support Wrestle Like a Girl. One, they can go online to wrestlelikeagirl.org and make a donation. Two, if they have any sort of network that they can expose me to so that I can have a conversation about potential sponsorship, I would love to do that. Third, we have our gala every year, which is one of our main fundraisers, and it increases the visibility of women's wrestling and what a women's wrestler looks like. So we would love to get as many people in attendance in that. We try and keep it around the last 2 weeks of July every year because we can use that as a send-off to our athletes going to compete at the World Championships. And then if there's ever any interesting ideas of fundraisers or ways to increase visibility or promote the sport of wrestling that has a positive influence and is very supportive, we're always keen to know that and to engage in those conversations, because one of the things that really helps wrestling is when we get creative and we think outside of the box on how we can grow this sport and do things potentially unconventionally. So November 5th, I've said it before, but the All-Star match, that's going to have equal representation for men and women. We're going to be there. Wrestle Like a Girl has a booth, and we're going to actually be sponsoring that event because we are huge fans of and champions of equality. So feel free to reach out. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a dialogue and go to our website. You can also wear our gear and show everyone through that you support.
Yeah, and it just seems to be fitting. You're talking about the gear. I asked Geneva for a shirt for my wife when the last day I was in Fargo. I come back, and then we go on vacation. I come back. It's the last day. I was like, oh, man. So I just grabbed the shirt. Now, it's big on my wife. It fit me fine. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, and that day I wore the shirt was the day you guys made that announcement at the gala. So it was, I guess, clandestine timing, I guess, if I'm even using that word correctly. But Sally Roberts, I am excited for what you have done. I've told you this off the show via text that this really is one of the most positive things the sport of wrestling has seen in the I don't even know. It probably historically, you can put this on the level of items like the wrestling getting back in the Olympics. Now, if we can get the emerging sports status to make this an NCAA sport, then they get the NAI on board. We have women's wrestling as a collegiate opportunity. So I'm all for it. So thank you for coming on the show. And any last words, because I know you can hardly convey your excitement sometimes about what's going on here.
You know what? I just want everyone to know that even though I'm the face and I'm pushing this effort right now, we're able to do what we do because we have so many supporters across the United States that are helping us. And even if it's just through a text message like what you did to say, hey, this is really awesome, shooting me an email that said, hey, this is really cool. And just know that it's not me doing it. It is a group of people coming together. And what we've done is corralled everyone. And so we work together as one cohesive unit going forward. So thank you, everyone, for your support. And we continue to want to do really great things for the sport of wrestling.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll have Sally Roberts on throughout the course of this process. She doesn't know it yet. I just told her she's going to be on the show later. So, Sally, you're coming on to give us updates throughout the course of the year. Thank you for coming on for round 2 here on Short Time.
I love it. Thanks, man.
You are listening to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast with my daddy, Jason Bryant.
Oh, man, that's one thing when you come back from a long trip and you want to hear, and it's the voices of your kids. Now, right now, we recorded that drop with Lucy about a year ago, so I'm going to need to update that because her vocabulary has improved. She's going into kindergarten in a couple weeks, and if that doesn't blow my mind, oh, my goodness, it's wild. So big thanks to Sally Roberts from Wrestle Like a Girl, wrestlelikeagirl.org. That's where you find them, and that's I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited. I'm going to throw a second Saved by the Bell reference at you. I'm so excited. I'm so scared. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe it's because we've had Mario Lopez on the show before, or the fact that I grew up in an era where Saved by the Bell was just the bomb. Not counting their wrestling scenes on the gymnastics folding mats, and who knows, with Dustin Diamond Screech dressed as whatever. But I digress. Here on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, if this is your first time listening to the show, news, reviews, previews, and interviews from the biggest names and around the sport of wrestling. I don't really quite have a catchphrase for that. I used to at the beginning of the show, but I've changed things up. Might be changing the intro up here in a bit. We've been about a year on the current iteration, but this show talks to all sorts of people and things and stuff about the sport of wrestling, from the Olympic level all the way down to the grassroots level. And, of course, there's nothing more grassroots than what we're doing with Wrestle Like a Girl and Sally Roberts, as I'm tying that back in together. This program is listener-supported. We have a gear sponsor, Compound, at cmpteamwear.com. Cliff Fretwell, I understand his crew crushed it at the Compound College Combine. Excuse me, let's try that again. The C3 Compound College Combine at the NWCA convention this past week in Daytona Beach, Florida. So, tip of the cap, and I have some really good caps from Compound. I'll tell you more how to get those in a little bit, to Cliff Fretwell and his crew. So, this show listener supported by going to matttalkonline.com/join the team. With this network, you get all sorts of shows. I think we released almost 40 episodes, over 40 episodes in the month of July. Had a great number of downloads and a very diverse set of shows. More shows coming to the network soon as we work on some contracts. Yeah, some new schools coming on board. So more time to talk about wrestling all over the place. Once again, you can contribute, matttalkonline.com/join the team. Certain levels of patronage will get you certain levels of swag, just like the shirts and the hats that Compound has bequeathed us with here at Matt Talk Online. So if you like that, the daily wrestling newsletter at matttalkonline.com/news. That's a sign-up. Drops your email at 7 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Central, 5 a.m. Mountain, 4 a.m. Pacific. Or that's just when I send them out. So daily wrestling news. And there's been a lot of stuff in the news. So if you're up on the Suriano thing with Penn State, yeah, the newsletter is going to have all sorts of links from both sides of the fence. I mean, the New Jersey media loves this. The Penn State media loves this. Then there's some balanced stuff in there, and all sorts of just general niceness all around. So you can get that stuff delivered to your email each and every morning by signing up at matttalkonline.com/news. Oh boy, so a lot of things going on here in the world of wrestling. Senior World Championships are coming up in Paris, August 21st through 26th. I'll be there on the PA, so will not be broadcasting like I did at the Junior Worlds. I could go into a long run about the Junior Worlds, but Andy Hamilton, Richard Immel, and I kind of recapped that rather hastily at the Grillson restaurant and bar in Tampere, Finland, where we were talking about it with really no type of, form or method. There was no method to that madness, but you can go back and listen to that. This is episode 348, and I thank you for listening and spending your time with me. Yeah, that's all I got for a sign-off today, because you've always got time for short time.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.